We're at that weird point in the offseason where there's not a lot actually happening, but rumors are flying. We'll talk about those as well as some actual notes and news all today on Locked On Tigers.
You are Locked On Tigers, your daily Detroit Tigers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another edition of Locked On Tigers. I'm, of course, your host, Scott Bentley. Today is Wednesday, December 4th, 2024. Thank you so much for making Locked On Tigers your first listen every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place just a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win that first $5 bet. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started. Welcome in, everybody, to halfway point of the week. Happy Wednesday to all. So we're going to bounce around, talk about some more rumors. There's been some pretty big journalists that have put out different, rumor mill type of articles. Some, I don't even really want to call them reports, but guesses on where some players will land. The Tigers being listed in a couple of those. We'll talk about that involving Jace Jung. We'll talk about Arenado a little bit more, even though we did that. What was that? Yesterday, 2 episodes ago. I don't know. Time's a construct. Really, third base a little bit more in general. We'll talk about some starting pitching help the Tigers are rumored in. They're, throwing their hat in the ring, maybe not. We'll talk about that. AJ Hinch had some, I guess I'll call it an interview, but talked with the good folks over at 97.1 The Ticket on Tuesday morning. And we'll talk about some of his comments there. And then we'll kind of just bounce around the league and end the show by talking about some other news and notes from the sport and how they affect the Tigers. An awful rule change that is being rumored that I will complain about later. We're going to start off with Arenado again. The reason why we're starting off with him again, though, is because we already talked about it a lot. I spent like a segment and a half, maybe even 2 segments on Arenado this week. So not going to spend too much time about it, but it has become like the talk of the town. This is, and not because of me, obviously, but just there's been timing wise, a lot of people are talking about the potential of trading Nolan Arenado. A lot of fan bases are. Bleacher Report came out with an article on Tuesday that said they believe that Arenado will be traded. That his camp does not expect him to be back in St. Louis next year. We'll take that with a grain of salt. A lot of people say things over the offseason for leverage. A game that I really like to play, and something that I really like to remind people every single time there is a report about anything, is you have to ask yourself, who does this benefit? Very rarely, I guess once in a blue moon, but very rarely are reports just like leaked on accident. It's all with a motive. People go, hey, John Heyman, say that, that the Giants are going to sign Aaron Judge, that the Yankees up their offer one more time. Like, you know what I mean? Like that's just kind of how the game is played. So we'll see what happens with that. I just kind of want to put a bow on that conversation and kind of where I stand. As I said on that episode, I am anti-Arenado straight up. If you're getting all of the money that he is owed and you are giving up prospects for him, I would rather not. We again talked way more in depth on that show, just about the trajectory of his career, what his numbers have been, what he lacks now that he didn't used to, why the numbers have fallen off, the injury concerns, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's not saying that I'm anti adding Arenado, period. I would need the Cardinals to eat a decent amount, honestly, of the cash and still not give up a very good prospect pool to get him. I am not paying a high price tag for this current version of Nolan Arenado. I don't think that this is one where to me, everybody clamors about it. Everybody talks about how great it would be because he's a really big name, and that is obviously true. This guy's a multi-time All-Star, Platinum Glove winner. Is going to have his name at minimum thrown in the ring of being inducted into Cooperstown one day. I'm not trying to slander the man. He's one of my favorite third basemen of this generation. But at this point in his career, this is one where the, fan bases across the sport all are like, oh yeah, this is awesome because it's Nolan Arenado. And then he gets on your team and then you start not liking him because he has a 705 OPS and the defense takes another step back. Like, I would need the Cardinals to keep the price tag low, and as far as what the Tigers would have to give up, and eat a decent chunk of the contract for me to be like, all right, yeah, like, let's do it. Would he be an upgrade over what the third base position has been for this team? Absolutely. He could have a 690 OPS and a 250 average. He would probably still be a big upgrade over what we've been throwing out at third base over the last 3 years, just from defense alone. But that is not worth the price tag that is being thrown out there or the price tag that is associated with his name through contract. So that's just kind of where I stand. A lot of people are talking about it. Cody Stavenhagen wrote an article for The Athletic, one of our great beat writers, obviously, and mentioned that this, has some smoke. That doesn't mean that there's fire. That doesn't mean that it's going to happen. But there are several reporters out there that believe that the Tigers are legitimately at least kicking the tires on Arenado, or at least calling the Cardinals to be like, hey, like, what is the price tag? So we'll see what happens. I'm hesitant to be fully on board with that, but if it did happen, again, as I said, overpay or not, he would be an upgrade over what we've been throwing out at third base lately. So we'll see what happens with that. Speaking of third base, one of the more interesting and kind of unique rumors, I don't even know if rumor is really the right thing to call it. I think just one of the more interesting ideas that has been thrown out there by several different people as well as just kind of naturally through the fan base is the prospect of trading Jace Jung. And while I would really like, I'm a fan of Jace Jung. I wanted them to take him in his draft year. Did a draft show with the guys over at Tigers Minor League Report, and I remember saying that I wanted them to take Jung. He took a big step forward in the minor leagues this year and last year. Like, there's a lot to like, and I think he could be a pretty darn good ball player. But if you can trade Jace Jung in a package that guarantees you a legitimate everyday third baseman for multiple years, I don't know why you wouldn't do that. And the reason why is because, and I've referenced this before, I don't want third base to turn into a Family Guy, like it could be a boat situation, right? And I know I've referenced this scene before, but there's a scene in the very early seasons of Family Guy where everybody on the street gets a boat for free, and you can either get a boat or you can get a mystery box. And Peter takes the mystery box, and as he's opening it, says it could be anything, even a boat. You know how much we've wanted one of those. When looking at the position of third base, Jace Jung is not going to move to second. He was drafted as a second baseman. He played second in college. He was playing second throughout the minors. Last year, moved to third base. He is not going back to second. Colt Keith showed enough to hold that position. Does that mean that Colt Keith is going to be a second baseman for the next 15 years? No. But in the immediate future, Colt Keith is your second baseman. He improved defensively in the second half of the season from the first half and did well enough to be a Silver Slugger nominee offensively. If it wasn't for the horrible first month and a half, 2 months of the season offensively, you're talking about a guy that would have been a mid-700s OPS hitter as a rookie. There is way too much there, and like Jace Jung certainly didn't do enough in his first stint in the majors to take second base away from Colt Keith. He's not playing first. He's not playing short. We don't need another corner outfield lefty. It's third base for him, right? Unless he next year just absolutely tears the cover off the ball and Colt Keith, hits 230, then like he's really third base or nothing for the Tigers. He's very much pigeonholed in what he can do and what role he can fill going forward. So, to bring this back to the original conversation about it could be anything, even a boat, the best case scenario for Jace Jung is to be the Tigers' everyday regular third baseman for the next however many years, right? 4, 5, 6 years. That's best case scenario. If you can get that now and not play the will he or won't he game because he is a prospect and he didn't hit very well in his first stint in the majors, then I don't know why you don't do that. Now, that doesn't mean that that type of offer is on the table. That doesn't mean that that's an option for the Tigers. That doesn't mean that other organizations value Jace Jung that highly. All I'm saying is that if the opportunity did present itself to move Jace Jung and you were to bring in an everyday third baseman with multiple years of control, I think you kind of have to do that. That all being said, this isn't me pounding my fist on the table. They need to trade Jace Jung. He's terrible, and they need to trade him like immediately. Not even remotely what I'm saying. And if they do hold on to him, we can hope that he will continue his development, start getting the timing down of velocity at the major league level, and turn into that third baseman that a lot of people in this fan base thought he might have been able to become last year and this year. So something to keep an eye out for there. I think Jace Jung's name is probably going to be in the trade market a little bit more than maybe people realize, just because he there isn't a lot of versatility there. He is really just kind of pigeonholed into he's either a third baseman or he's not a part of the team. Not too many other roles that he can really grab. Okay, let's keep the ball rolling here. I want to talk about Luis Castillo of I almost said the Managers, the Mariners, and an article that came out really kind of saying that the Tigers might be a decent fit for him. We'll talk about that and more right after this. Got to talk to y'all today about our friends over at FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place all of your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, everybody, welcome back here. Segment 2 of Locked On Tigers. Appreciate y'all for tuning in, as always, making us your first listen every single day. Shout out to the everydayers that do tune in every day. We will, of course, be back tomorrow, continuing our offseason conversations. We'll start looking ahead to winter meetings at some point this week, because that is right around the corner, which is super, super exciting. There's also some general manager / front office rankings that I want to go over. The Tigers didn't grade out too well in that, despite their great season this year. So got a lot still to talk about in this offseason, obviously. But today we are talking about some of the news and notes and rumors that are surrounding the Tigers over the last few days. Talked about Nolan Arenado, talked about Jace Jung, went way longer on Jace Jung than I expected to there. Luis Castillo is another name that has been linked to the Tigers, not because the Tigers have actually showed interest, though. And I want to make that abundantly clear. This was an ESPN article by Kylie McDaniel and David Schoenfield, two guys that have really taken off their journalist careers with ESPN. Now, McDaniel, man, I remember when he was like a smaller name at Fangraphs, and now he is one of the lead prospect guys over at ESPN. Good for him. So They just did an article just talking about some of the biggest trade pieces of the offseason, and they each gave an opinion on where they think a good fit is and where each player could end up. So this is completely based in these two gentlemen's opinions. This is not a look. The Tigers have said they're interested in Castillo. This is not, we're hearing rumblings that this is going to happen. This is strictly the opinion of two guys that work for ESPN. Okay. Want to make that very clear. But in the Luis Castillo portion, I think it was Schoenfield mentioned the Detroit Tigers as a potential suitor for Luis Castillo. While I don't hate it, certainly, there are a lot of things to like about Castillo. The Mariners are in a position where they had one of the best rotations we have seen this past season and didn't make the playoffs because their offense was absolutely an abomination to offenses. So that would lead me to believe that if they are truly keen on selling off starting pitching, that they would want offense in return. The reason why I disagree with this article is because the Tigers should also be looking to add offense. Would Luis Castillo be a really fun and fantastic add to this rotation? Yes, right? If they brought in Castillo, signed a free agent starting pitcher or two, and walked into next year with Skubal, Olsen, Castillo as a top three, Job getting worked in at some point in the season, even if it's not on opening day, and you have the starting pitching depth of Mize, Manning, you can, again, like I said, go out there and still sign a free agent or two. That would be a really good rotation, and that would be awesome. But pitching wasn't the issue this past season, right? Certainly not down the stretch. If anything, starting pitching is one of the lower end needs this year. And that's not, again, they need starting pitching depth. They genuinely need to go out and bring in some starting pitching free agents. But in terms of trading legitimate assets away to bring somebody else in, Castillo under contract for the next 3 years, not a terrible contract, about market value. I think it's pretty fair in terms of, team and what they're paying. I think it's a little over 70 mil for the next 3 years. I think he's really good and would be a great ad. And we'd come on here and be excited if that news broke, assuming they didn't, give up like Max Clark or Kevin McGonigal to get him. But I feel like those are two teams that are trying to accomplish the same thing this offseason. Maybe use some of the starting pitching depth they have to bring in hitters in a trade. If they even are going to make a trade, either of them. So I see the vision a little bit. You kind of bolster up the rotation. You give, you get another top end of the rotation starter, so it's not just Skubal and then kind of a big drop off there. I completely get it from that perspective, and it would be a welcomed addition, but I just really can't see that lining up based on what the Tigers and Mariners team needs both are this year. I think you're probably a little bit off, but we'll see what happens. Let's talk about AJ Hinch's comments on 97.1 The Ticket. There's not a ton to take out of this, but it did happen, and so I want to talk about it and bring it up. Talked a lot about the momentum of 2024 and hopefully that it carries over into 2025. Talked about how they're not the surprise team anymore. Like teams are kind of expect them to be really solid. So you have all these normal kind of comments, but the biggest two things that I took out of his comments were, one, that they want to improve from within. And I know that when people hear that, they get really upset. I think that if they only improve from within this winter, that I will be upset too. But it is possible to improve from, like, you should want to improve from within and bring in external talent. You should want to do both of those things every winter. So I'm not inherently upset just from hearing that, unless it's paired with, and that's why we're not going to spend any money. Then, like every organization in baseball should be trying to get better. The biggest thing that I took from his comments were when he talked about the front office and he talked about how much he likes working for Scott Harris, excuse me, and Jeff Greenberg and this front office as a whole, mentioned kind of everybody in there, and really drove home the fact that I think he said he has never worked for an organization that focuses on the strengths of players more. And that's not an exact quote, that's slight paraphrasing, but that's essentially what he said. Is that this organization, and to anybody that watched the Detroit Tigers, especially in the second half of 2024, you are aware of that. That is pretty obvious. This team, Jason Benetti tweeted it out at one point. Team full of specialists. Everybody knows their role. Everybody knows what they're good at. Everybody knows what everybody else is good at and what role they're going to be put in. And they make the most out of those opportunities. And talking about how they don't even really focus on the negatives. They just focus on the positives and focus on what roles they need filled and who has the positives that line up with that. And I think that mindset is very healthy. I also think it is important to still have the self-reflective qualities to understand what you need to improve on and what you struggle in. But again, he didn't say they don't do that. I think that AJ Hinch is very good at his job and is very smart and is a very brilliant baseball mind. And so he is able to be successful with that mindset. I also think that ideally you get to a place where you have a bunch of players that are very well-rounded and can be good at a lot of different things instead of just, okay, Andy Ibanez is going to get a roster spot next year just to pinch hit against lefties. You know what I mean? Like, I think ideally you raise the talent floor to a point where you have guys that are really good at 3 or 4 things instead of one. And like, this is the only situation you're going to be in. And that, like, Andy Ibanez was a fine defender, obviously started against left-handed pitching as well. I don't mean to like pick on him. I think he does have a role on this team and he'll be here next year. And I'm glad that he will. But it's one of those things where you want to walk that line of like, okay, yes, but I think we also want some more like well-rounded, really good all-around players as well. And so I'm not complaining. This is not a bad thing. It's just an observation I made about his specific comments about how the front office operates. And I think that that's a very fine line to walk. You don't want to go too extreme in that direction, but you also very much need to understand what everybody on your team is good at too. And I give a ton of props to the front office for being able to do that and identify that really well. Let's talk about an awful rule change and then some other news and notes from around the sport. We will do that right after this. All right, everybody, welcome back. Your third and final segment of Locked On Tigers. Appreciate y'all for tuning in as always. So it was rumored on Monday and Tuesday. I think the first time I saw it was Sunday night, but it didn't have a lot of legs. And then over the last couple of days, it's just gotten louder and louder. This is not a rule that has happened. This is something that Manfred reportedly is talking about, speaking with the owners about the prospect of it being implemented. And it is, I think they're calling it the golden at bat rule. This is, and I mean this from the bottom of my heart, one of the stupidest things I've ever heard in my life. I cannot actually express how much I dislike this potential rule change. Basically, if it isn't implied in the name, what you would be able to do is one at bat a game at any point in the game, you get to put whoever you want on your team up in that AB. Doesn't matter if they've been subbed out, doesn't matter if they've already hit, doesn't matter where you are in the lineup. You have just one kind of like ultimate at bat where you can put anybody on your team up there. And obviously all like the wrinkles and kinks of it haven't been ironed out. This is very much just an on paper idea that some people are talking about. I think this is awful. I like just stop trying to change the greatest game that God ever invented. Like stop. It's good. We're good, right? The pitch clock I could live with. It shortened games. I think most people don't even really notice it at this point. I understand why they did that. The runner on second rule, I think, is really stupid. Does it completely ruin the game of baseball? No. It affects regular season extra inning games. That's it. I can live with that, right? The pickoff thing. You know what? Do I love it? No. I don't love it, but that's something, again, I can live with. It's not something that you really notice game to game too terribly often. Bigger bases. Sure, man. It keeps players healthy. I'm fine with that. Like all of these rules that have been slowly, and like we're gonna get a challenge system if first balls and strikes. I can live with that. I don't want full automation because I want catcher defense value to matter, but I can live with a challenge system. I can absolutely live with that. There's been a lot of change in the game of baseball over the last 5 years. And I think that we have all taken it in stride and been very patient with baseball and not left the game and not been very, loud about, I mean, we have, voiced our frustration with some of these, but like, I think we've all really done a pretty good job of taking it in stride as a community and as a fan base. And there just comes a point where you need to just stop. This is, one of my favorite quotes about baseball is, and it's from I believe a TV show, is, if somebody that played baseball in the 1800s went in a time machine and got placed on a field or in the stands for a game today, it would still be the same game. And while there are, as I just mentioned, a lot of small stuff that has been adjusted, I feel like that is still mostly the case. Is it quicker? Yes. Is there a clock now? Yes. But it's still at heart the same game. And I feel like this is a slippery slope into that no longer being the case. What are we doing? This is nobody asked for this. Nobody wants this. Not a single person is like, hey, it'd be really cool if Aaron Judge could get 2 at bats in the bottom of the ninth. That's not the point. Not the point of baseball, unfortunately. It's the ultimate team game. Don't have, one-man teams in the game of baseball. I think that would be an absolute joke. So let's not do that. Cool. Couple other signings from around the league before I get you out of here. Aroldis Chapman to the Red Sox. That bullpen is actually looking decent. Last year I remember talking about how I thought people were really sleeping on the Red Sox and they were being way too hard on them. And that I thought they were going to be halfway decent. And they were an around 500 team, which is kind of what I expected. I think this next year, the Red Sox, they're in on Juan Soto. Everybody's seen that, the rumors and whatnot. I'm not sure I really believe that, but we'll see what happens with that whole situation. Obviously, if they get Soto, they instantly become a contender in the AL East. But I think the really big thing for me with Boston is just like, even if they don't get Soto, they're really only a couple pieces away from, I think, kind of catapulting themselves back into that mid to even a high 80s win total. And that's a playoff team in this age of baseball with the expanded postseason. So I don't hate it. I think if you're talking about best pitching coaches in the sport, we obviously talk about Chris Fetter a lot. Who's right up there and maybe even equal with him is Andrew Bailey of the Red Sox. He is undoubtedly, undubitably one of the 2 or 3 best pitching coaches in the game of baseball. And you put a guy that can throw, 105 or whatever Chapman can still do. With that, you're talking about a guy that might be pretty darn valuable for that team. And then Kyle Higashioka to the Texas Rangers. I like this pickup. I wonder what it means for their catching situation going forward. Obviously, they traded for Carson Kelly this past season, so we'll see what happens. But yeah, like Higgy is a really good defensive catcher that has been pretty solid over the last few years, and I think that that's a good add for a Rangers team that desperately wants to get back into the postseason after missing the playoffs following a World Series ring. So good value too, multiple years. Good for him. Good for the Rangers. Word. Thanks for making Locked On Tigers your first listen every single day. Shout out to the everydayers that do tune in every day. We will, of course, be back tomorrow. I appreciate you all greatly. Peace and love. Going to therapy's dope. I'll catch you all then, baby. Go Tigers.